Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast, episode number 131 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week I have 4 new LitRPG titles just for you folks at home. Before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to Justin Lincoln for becoming our latest Patreon supporter. So thank you, Justin, for all the other Patreon supporters. Remember, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/geekbytespodcast. There you go. Just as a quick heads up, I'm actually recording this particular episode a bit in advance than I normally do. So it's going to be a smaller episode. When most folks watch this, I'm already going to likely be at DragonCon in Atlanta, Georgia. Filming stuff, doing live recordings of the LitRPG booth there at DragonCon and on the con floor. So keep an eye out for those on our Facebook and Twitter pages for LitRPG Podcast. So there you go. But of course, the LitRPG titles I'm going to be reviewing for you include Faithful Defender, a LitRPG GameLit adventure novel. That's going to be the second book in that series. After that will be I Am Gamer, the first book in that series. Then it'll be Hunter's Bond, Apex Chronicles book number 1. And last but not least, the Second Realms, 10 Realms book number 1. And this is actually out on August the 30th, which is when, by the time most people watch this will already be available. So there we go. Before we begin that, we're going to go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with our first story with Jeffrey Falcon Logue. He's continuing to diligently work on his game. There's another update of the Slime Dungeon Chronicles side-scroller now with a menu. So I'm going to pull up a nice YouTube video of that going on. So it's actually very interesting. I do enjoy this particular side scroll. I would actually pay for this. It's coming along very well. You have some different slimes in this particular update with elemental powers. I think this one's going to be a poison slime that's on the screen currently. Kind of this Percival's thing, but again, as it continues on and eats different things, it changes its core. It changes its powers, I think. At least I think that's the premise part of this. Oh look, the slime could actually hurt things now. So very interesting mechanics. And I'm always super proud of my friend Jeff Falcon Logue, who is again a leverage author, for doing something outside of the realm of LitRPG to continue to be creative. So good on you, buddy. In other LitRPG news, we have Sean Callahan from Game Reads having a chat with Matt Dinneman, the author of the Dominion of Blades series and the creator of Cool Cats with Mustache Arts. So go check out that. We'll link in the show notes for the Game Reads page. Go subscribe to them. Good folks there. And listen to Matt Dinneman's interview. Also on YouTube, the good folks at Sound With Theater have released the first chapter of the audiobook version of Monster Hunter NYC on YouTube. It's kind of a neat sample because the inclusion of all the neat background music in this particular bit. I know that this is taking like a super long time for Jeff Hayes and Annie Lockhart and the entire Sound With crew, because they're doing something really cool with this particular audiobook. They're not just reading the text. They're actually creating a musical soundtrack to go with it, like background music, but also actual full-blown length songs that are original for this particular novel and for the other Monster Hunter books. But you can actually check out the whole story. I did an interview with the author Harmon Cooper. Go check that out. And he kind of tells like the kind of touching story of how this whole project came to be. So it's a very interesting thing. But I'll play a quick little clip of the YouTube sample.
Chapter 1. Aya and Lady Cassandra. As soon as I activated the Monster Hunter app, I was whisked away to a space that reminded me of an arena with its lights off. I could tell the space was expansive, mainly because of the floating red lanterns above. But other than that, I had no idea what to expect.
Okay, there you go. So really super small sample, but again, the full first chapter is on the Summit Theater live YouTube page. So go check that out. Very interesting. Even that sample we showed you, you can actually hear the music and the background stuff. So really neat stuff. Okay, on to some Dragon Con stuff. If you're going to be at Dragon Con 2018 this year in Atlanta, Georgia, don't forget to follow Jeff Sproul. He's the author of Sigil Online, but more importantly, he's the LitRPG quest giver at Dragon Con. This is something he did last year that was super fun, and he's doing it again this year. Basically, Jeff Sproul shows up in like this, I don't want to say steampunk necessarily, but like this, definitely this fantasy costume, big top hat, and he's a quest giver, and he gives people quests, and they go out and do those quests, and they get rewards. And it's just like semi-promotional, but it's also just fun, and he has such a fun time doing it. And it was really neat last year too to see people, just like random people that he didn't really know, come up and ask him like, "Oh, you're the quest giver. I've been looking for you. Do you have any quests for me, sir?" And there's this whole by play thing. It's really super fun and interesting, and he's going to be doing it this year. But he actually tells people on Twitter, using his Twitter handle, twitter.com/JeffSproul, to where he's going to be on any particular day or any particular hour, so people can find him, get their quests, get updated quests, and there's actually a whole series of quests that he'll do and give you nice rewards for. So definitely go check, go follow Jeff Sproul on Twitter, just if for nothing else, and then for the quest giver thing if you're going to be in Atlanta, Georgia for Dragon Con. Also in Dragon Con, just reminders, there's going to be a LitRPG gala, which is essentially Aelterna Kong is hosting the third annual kind of like meetup for fans and authors in Atlanta, Georgia during Dragon Con. It's going to be on Saturday, September the 1st this year from 12 to 2 p.m. at the Sidebar in Atlanta. We'll have an address in the show notes if you're going to be in the area. To feel free to stop on by and say hi to your fellow fans, and also to some other LitRPG authors. I know Aelterna Kong is going to be there since he's hosting. I'm going to be there as well, and then several other LitRPG authors are going to be there as well, as they were last year. So you'll get a chance to meet a bunch of people whose stuff you might like. So there you go. Also in the show notes, you're going to find the schedules for the author signings. We have a LitRPG booth that myself and several other authors, including Aelterna Kong, Dakota Crouch, James Hunter, James Falconlogue, Aelterna Kong, and Michael Chatfield are all kind of combined to create at the Dragon Con this year. And those four authors, Dakota Crouch, James Hunter, Jeffrey Falconlogue, and Aelterna Kong, will actually have scheduled book signings at the booth. It's going to be again at the America's Mart Building number 2, West Wing, 2nd floor. Booth numbers 2820 and 2822. We're getting I guess it's 2 booth spaces, so it won't be crowded this year. But there's a full-on schedule for when those authors are actually going to be there to sign stuff for people. Of course, you can buy their physical copies of the books while you're there. Why not? And you can get them signed by those particular authors. But of course, there's probably going to be more LitRPG authors coming in and out the entire time, between like Friday and Monday. We also have a link, some pictures in the show notes for the panels that some of the authors are going to be on, including Aelterna Kong. He has a whole slew of panels he's going to be on at Dragon Con. Also, James Hunter, I'm going to be on several panels as well, as is Michael Chatfield. We have their schedules for whatever panels they're on in the show notes as well. And there you go. That's LitRPG news, folks. On to Out Now. So these are some book titles that, by the time most people watch this, will have come out this week. So it'll be including Hondo Nix's Dan the Adventurer book number 2. So that's the second book right in the Gold Girls and Glory book series. So also out by the time most people watch this is going to be How to Train Your Kaiju, a LitRPG kaiju thriller. There you go. As is Steamtown Chronicles book number 1, The Dark Market. That's going to be a LitRPG, a GameLit novella. I took a look at it already. It actually is LitRPG as well, even if it's not going to be like heavy on the game mechanics. The author is sad online. He considers it to be light LitRPG, which is still perfectly fine. It's still LitRPG. I haven't had a chance to read it though, so I'm looking forward to catching up on that one. Also out from Robert Bevan is another new short story called Taint Theme. So another humorous short story from that wonderful LitRPG humor novel. Just a heads up though, most of his stories are very curse heavy, very poop humor heavy, kind of bathroom humor heavy. So be aware of that. If that kind of humor works for you, you're gonna love this series. You'll love the short stories for the Carving the Creatures of the Critical Failure series. But most of these are kind of fun. So and short. Also out now is Maelstrom book number 2 from Ajink K. Denick. So there you go. Some new audiobooks that are out as of this recording. Again, because this is recorded early, it's only been a couple days since the last podcast. But Tao Wang's Adventure on Brad books number 1 through 3 as a box set is actually out as audiobook box set as well. So it's all there as an audiobook box set. I believe the total length is somewhere in the neighborhood of like 15 hours for the audiobook for all 3 books combined. So it's a nice little value there. On to upcoming LitRPG. This is just where I read off the stuff that's coming out in the near future. We do have a couple new additions to this list, though. On September the 1st, it should be Coast on Fire, the System Apocalypse book number 5. September the 3rd should be The Path, Just Cause Universe book number 14. On September the 4th, Limitless, which is going to be the 4th book in the Project Chrysalis series. On September the 4th as well, it'll be the 2nd book in the Euphoria Online series called Nightmare Keep. On September the 8th, this one's new to the list, the 2nd book in the Uniworld Online trilogy series. It is called The Song Mistress. This is that one where the main character was like deaf or mute for some reason, and she goes in the game, she becomes like a bard. So there you go. On September the 15th, it'll be Uberian Passage, a LitRPG mystery. I don't know if this is actually LitRPG. It's from an author I haven't heard of before, but it says LitRPG in the title, so we'll have to wait and see if it actually is. On September the 24th, it'll be Game Changer, Reality Benders, book number 3. On September the 26th, Free Haven Online, book number 2. It'll be in that series. September 28th, Couch Potato Chaos, Game Bound. On October the 8th, it'll be Kingdom of the Dead, an NPC's Path book number 2. October the 25th, A Clan's Honor. There we go. And this one is also new to the list. The 2nd book in the Bard from Barliona series by Vasily Mahenko. And I can't remember her first name, Miss Dimitrivia. The Song of Shadow. So this is the 2nd book in that. Vasily Mahenko basically already finished the full Way of the Shaman series. And so he's released with the co-author a new series of books in the Barliona universe. So they're set in the same game universe, but they're not the same main characters. So this is the 2nd book in that series. It'll be out on November the 19th of this year. And on November 21st, it'll be Free Haven Online, book number 3. So there we go. That's it. So on to new releases and reviews. And new releases and reviews, folks. Again, only 4 reviews this week. We're going to begin with Faithful Defender, a LitRPG/GameLit adventure novel, Aelterna Online book number 2, written by M. Colray. And again, one of the biggest things about this whole series is that I actually really enjoyed each one of these novels, but the cover art just, it kind of sucks. I mean, I don't mean that necessarily. It's just that it doesn't do the novels justice. Like the first one had this lady on there who almost had nothing to do with the story. At least there's a dude on the cover this time, because there is actually a dude. That's the main character in the story. But the cover art itself is, it just, don't judge us by the cover. This is actually quite an interesting and a good story. It has a lot of good aspects to which I'll talk about. It is 335 pages, $3.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. He's found a new home. Now, he has to defend it. Denel's goddess has granted him the title of Paladin, and with it, the responsibility of protecting the people of his village, both reptilian and otherwise. The threats facing the faithful of the goddess watch are numerous, and the last thing Denel wants to do is sit and wait for the enemy to come to him. Isolated and far from player civilization, Denel must forge bonds and friendships with the races that view his friends as nothing more than monsters to be culled. Unbeknownst to him, he's no longer the only digital resident of Aelterna Online, and the newcomers are out to destroy everything he's worked to create. What he's become is more than the system is prepared to accept. What will he be forced to do to survive? So there we go. And again, even in the review, I talk about, the cover art's not amazing, but the novel is pretty good. The first book in the series actually does a really good job of setting up the world. There's a ton of great world building. And the main character becomes the first digitalized citizen in this fantasy VR MMORPG. It's described not only as an interesting magic system and RPG system in the novel, but it also did some really good world building. And I think that's probably the story's strength, at least to me, is the ability of the author to create in-depth cultures, in-depth race histories and city histories, and really fully fleshing out kind of behavioral reasons why creatures and species and nations act the way they do. That to me is challenging, because it's really super easy to just like have a really light background for a character, but the author went out of his way to do a lot of good world building. I think it brings the story to life in a lot of ways. The second book in the series expands on that and really does, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. The scope of the story expands past the lizard person village, the main character became part of in book 1, to the larger game world. One of the things, again, that I really like about it is the fact that the author puts a clear effort into creating cultures. They have distinctive rules, distinctive social conditions, social norms, rich histories for each race and community. It adds like a subtle layer of depth to the world and an opportunity for some interesting storytelling. There's still some good RPG progression here and some good action too, in particular like how the main character's barrier magic develops in the story and how it's used not just to protect, but also to give the main character an ability in which a interesting story conflict is shaped around. So I like that aspect as well. Crafting is also returns in the story and progresses in its own RPG way. Overall, had a good time reading the story, and again, I'm always impressed by the author's efforts to create a rich character but also full cultures for them. And again, that's to me the highlight of this particular series, is that I feel like the author has some training or has gone to school for maybe some cultural anthropology or something. They're just like these little notes of like, oh, that I think I recognize those little like details that make this to be an interesting series. So for me, always had a good time with this. Gets a 7.5 out of 10. That's Faithful Defender, a LitRPG game lit adventure novel, Aelterna Online, book number 2, with the score again 7.5 out of 10. Okay. On to I Am Gamer by Gabriel L. Rathwig. It is 406 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Lawrence is having a shitty day. His girlfriend is not only cheating on him, but she's cheating on him with his best friend. He had the added benefit of finding about it firsthand. To make matters worse, a legendary Native American goddess sent him back to North America circa 1400 AD. What's a gamer to do? So there we go. There's some more to the description, but that's all the story portion. It's like everything else is just like, oh, here's some stuff. And just to note for other readers, like a lot of the author's works, Gabriel Rathwig or G.L. Rathwig, he does have a playlist that is almost a soundtrack to each chapter. Each chapter has a particular song that's meant to be a background sound to, or be a background added layer of depth to it. The links for those are in the Amazon description for this, and also in the beginning of the novel. So if you want to listen to that, I personally didn't. I thought that in this one instance, that because this is a set in the past, which is like a fantasy-ish alternate history, the soundtrack actually detracted a little bit for me personally, just because that kind of music doesn't exist in this world. So it didn't work for me in this particular case. But again, usually these soundtracks are just another aspect of the author's artistic bent. Also, I should note that there is a small use of marijuana in 2 like small scenes in the story. I'm only saying this because I know some people have issues with that. It's not used any differently than drinking alcohol in the story, but for some people, it's kind of a no-go from if it's in the story at all. So letting you know about it. The beginning of the story is a setup for a slice of life alternative fantasy history story. It shifts a bit from what I expected, and I mentioned this just because I read the first couple chapters months and months ago from one of the author's other stories. Like there's like a little section at the back of the story with the beginning of this one, and it kind of does the world setup like, oh, how the main character is going to be eventually transported to this alternate history, who he's by, his whole like woe is me setup, why he's willing to leave our universe for this alternate history fantasy universe, and it left me. It was a good tease. It was a good hook. And then when I finally read this one, I was like, oh, this isn't going exactly the way I thought it was. Which is just me personally. That sometimes you have to adjust your expectations of what a story is actually going to be. But it took me a little while to get used to what the story is. But once I did, I actually had a really good time with it. The beginning transition between that first section where he's in the real world and when he's first transported to the, I don't want to say game world because it's not supposed to be like an alternative. Main character is supposed to be sent to the past before colonialism had really wiped out the Native American populations. That's not a spoiler, it's in the novel description. And he's supposed to be there, and his big goal is supposed to be to like unite all the tribes and fend off the conquerors and give history a chance to reset, where like hundreds of millions of people weren't slaughtered by disease and conquerors. And that first introduction to that section when he's actually in the new world, and the introduction to the game mechanics and his new powers and abilities, it was a little awkward for me. I'll admit that. The main character is definitely overpowered, and this is noted in several reviews, and that he has not only is he kind of overpowered on his stats, but he's also overpowered with his scaling weapons, clothing, armor, and his bag of holding. So there are definitely some very overpowered characteristics for the main character, which makes, unfortunately, his ability to have that power progression where he starts off weak and gets stronger, that doesn't really exist here. Like on a numbers level it does, but like as far as the descriptions go, he's already kind of super strong and quick and agile when he's first starting out with his like stats at level like 1, basically at 1. And then even though he gains levels and he gains stats, that description of his abilities and strength and agility doesn't really match what the numbers say they would be like. And that, like I said, minor point. But again, it was a kind of a transition to get to like the really good, meaty, cultural, interesting parts of the story. So it takes a little while to get going after that initial world transition section. But once he does reach the Native American tribes, the story really kind of finds an interesting pace. You get to see the world building at that point. You get to see history, not just as the main character recalls, but as something that feels a little more living. There are fleshed out cultures, myths, traditions that are described as the main character interacts with these Native American tribes. And I think that's where the story really finds its strength, because that's where the alternative history aspect comes into play. Before that, it's just him and a lady kind of walking, fighting a few monsters, and like the game mechanics being described. But there's really no like cultural aspects. I mean, there's a tiny bit, but it doesn't really come into play like well until you actually get to the where he meets the larger tribe systems. And from there on in, it's a really good adventure story, again, with aspects of like alternative history. You could tell the author did at least some minor research into what the behavior, traditions, and technology-ish technology would be for that particular time frame that he's setting this story into. So I enjoyed it. Now the game mechanics, again, they're not great, but they're not necessarily bad either. Again, they're going to be familiar to most LitRPG readers. They're consistent throughout the story, so it's definitely a LitRPG story. The main character, again, gains levels, gains stats points. He earns them, he assigns them, he earns levels and many skills and abilities. But again, I already mentioned like the main characters starts at overpowered, and his stats increases aren't as impactful as they could have been. That's kind of what it comes down to. There also are real-time strategy aspects when the main character comes into position of power and he starts assigning jobs to people and resource management kind of stuff. And there's also crafting elements in the story as well. Overall, it's a fun slice of life story, and I think it has a lot of potential. I've looked forward to reading this for quite a long time since I read that first little, like, hinty novel blurb in another one of the author's stories. And I think, personally, I'm a big fan of alternative history novels. This one, again, isn't as in-depth in the accuracy of the history of the time period. It does have a fantasy bent. There is magic. There are mythical creatures that have come to life from these Native American histories and myths that are in the story. And of course, there's also RPG mechanics. So it's not entirely just an alternative history where someone's ported back in time, but there is that layer of that aspect. So if you like those kind of stories and you like LitRPG, this mesh is probably going to be pleasing to you. I also think that of the author's many novels that he's written and published, I think this one actually had the widest appeal. There's good action, there's good adventure, there's good community building, and there's good craftings. And overall, again, because there's not as much substance use as there are in some of the other stories that he has, I think this, again, is going to be the most appealing to the most more people, just because it's relatable, and it is interesting. It's different, at least. So for me, it gets a score of 7.4 out of 10. That's I Am Gamer with a score of 7.4 out of 10. I liked it. There we go. Okay, on to our next review, which is going to be Hunter's Bond, Apex Chronicles book number 1 by C.E. Keen. It is 357 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And I'll read you the author's description. When Simon immerses himself in the game world of Apex as Aris the Guardian, he finds a living, breathing ecosystem that feels more real than anything he's ever experienced before. The creatures that inhabit Apex are cunning, ferocious, and a massive challenge for even the most experienced hunter. In order to rank up in the Hunters Guilds and participate in the most prestigious hunts, Simon will have to slay increasingly infinitely more and threatening creatures and use what he gathers to craft powerful armors and weapons. But a fearsome beak stalks the jungle, untouchable even by the guild. To have any hope of stopping her, Simon won't just have to level up and hone his skills, he'll have to put his trust in his fellow hunters. For a lifelong soloer, that's no easy feat. So, okay, here we go. Now, full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased the novel after it was released. Also heads up, this author is doing a very interesting promotional concept for this novel as of now, which is when it's already out, when this is recording. They are doing a Facebook gaming event where, because the novel is heavily influenced and inspired by the Monster Hunter franchise, the author is hosting like a bunch of like online games in the Monster Hunter universe, including like Monster Hunter World, and also there's a new Monster Hunter game for the the Nintendo Switch, which is also coming out now, which the author is also hosting games and trying to organize hunts and everything. So it's kind of a neat thing to do. We talked about it last week in the show notes, so if you want to go check that out, the author also has the information on their Facebook page. Okay. This novel is heavily inspired by Monster Hunter, a video game franchise. It's not a copy, but you can tell the author has a great love of that video game series and puts a lot of effort into incorporating the aspects of that franchise that are interesting and beloved. The game mechanics, they're going to be familiar. There's an MMO character sheet that has levels, stats, skills, and special abilities. And the only stat that feels like it's new, is, at least to me, was the morale stat. Morale is apparently supposed to add an element of lost player death. Morale lowers after a death and reduces health regeneration, skill growth, and a bunch of other things. It's essentially a debuff that can only be removed by learning from the character's last death. So, for example, if one of the players is killed by some lizard creature, he'll lose morale. And if he keeps going back and keeps making stupid mistakes or not learning from his mistakes, he'll keep losing morale and keep getting additional debuffs to the point where he's not actually learning any experience anymore. He can raise that morale again by learning from his mistakes, basically, and doing some action during the fight with that monster, where it shows that he's learned from whatever error he made that caused his death. So it's a very interesting mechanic. I liked it. Other game mechanics that are important from the Monster Hunter game franchise include an emphasis on gathering monster parts for crafting powerful and sometimes very specific weapons and armor for more challenging hunts. That's actually a really big part of the story. Monster research is required, and hunters who it's not one of those game systems where the main character looks to be and sees its level and its name necessarily. The characters actually has to do research, that take out a notebook and note the creature's behaviors, its markings, anything else they can think of and see. And over time, that information is revealed. Oh, this is what the main character or the monster's name is, their weaknesses, the particular behaviors that will lead to a successful hunt, hopefully. And like the game it's inspired by, if a hunter does not do the due diligence and research about the monster they're hunting, they're going to die again and again and again. I think that's one of the things I liked the most about the novel, is that it does take those interesting aspects from the Monster game. That I've only played Monster Hunter World, so I'm not the biggest authority on this, but even from just playing that game, I see a lot of like, oh, I remember that from this game. I remember the challenges from that video game that are reflected in the story. And I the people who love that franchise, I think they're really going to like the story, just because it's going to remind them of that. But it's not an exact copy, but you're still going to get that same vibe of like, oh yeah, I remember these things, and this is a different game system that's being turned into a story. And for me, that was kind of a draw. Story-wise, after a brief real life setup of who the main character is and how he can play a video game long term, the rest of the story stays in the VR MMO. So the majority of the story, I think, 94% or so, is in the video game. It's in the VR MMORPG. So it's a very short, like, world section in the beginning, just to set things up. And the rest of the story is kind of a slice of life novel that focuses on a series of monster hunts, where the main character learns their new class and comes to appreciate just how realistic the game world is, in not just like how it feels, but also in like the culture and the behaviors and the AIs and the NPCs like behaviors and thought processes. There's just enough story to tie all the action scenes together, providing enough character development to make the reader care about the main character. And there's even a minor romance arc, which is always kind of neat. But again, because it's inspired by the Monster Hunter franchise, this is a very action-oriented novel. It really is. If you like action and you like the kind of content like, oh, hunting monsters and challenging yourself hunting these monsters, you're going to like the story. Even if you're not a fan or you never played the Monster Hunter like franchise, I think a lot of people who enjoy like action-oriented stories are going to like this still. But if you are a fan of the Monster Hunter franchise, you're going to hopefully appreciate all the like really detailed notes and references that are in the story. So there you go. I had a good time with it. Gets a score 7.4 out of 10 for me. That's Hunter's Bond Apex Chronicles, book number 1, with a score of 7.4 out of 10. There we go. One more review, folks. It's going to be the Second Realm, 10 Realms, book number 2. And I put book number 1 in the review, so I'll have to edit that out. Fixed. Nope. Sorry. Okay. It is, let's see. And I know skipping stuff. 696 pages, $4.99. It is an available on Kindle Unlimited. And just as a heads up, I'm actually recording this before the novel actually comes out. So I don't have all the links to the Amazon stuff yet. It is available for pre-order on Kobo, which is the links I'm using in the show notes for right now. When it gets updated, when it actually comes out, I'll update everything. It is, here's the author's description. And also, sorry, it's also written by Michael Chatfield. So if you're familiar with the Amarillo series, this is that same author. When Eric and Rugrat entered the 10 Realms, they didn't know what was going on. They only knew that they had contracted the 2-week curse. When entering the Second Realm, they came to understand their character sheets and part of the system that is called the 10 Realms, a place that the strong make the rules and the weak cling to them for protection and hope that they might be left in peace. They passed through the trials of the Beast Mountain dungeon, taking control of it and becoming the leader of nearly 200 people. Now in command of the Alva dungeon and looking to forge a new future, they need more power, mana stones, dungeon cores, monster cores, and if not, then the dungeon will stop functioning and they will need to relocate again. As they ascend to the Second Realm, Eric and Rugrat need to grow their skills, gain information, and find a dungeon. It's hardly ever that easy. So that is the author's description of the novel, and it does a decent job of telling you what the story is, but it does not reflect how different and cool this kind of is, to be honest. This is a good book in the 10 Realm series. This cultivation portal fiction LitRPG, it emphasizes crafting, action, adventure, and community building. So it's actually a very interesting mix. It's not just LitRPG. There's also a lot of other novel storytelling influences from other kind of genres like wushu, cultivation, but also a lot of the story feels like it's a collected serialized story. Like there's like book 2 and book 1 could just be like one long book, to be honest. And in each book, there's just like a lot of like shorter stories that are like strung together. And that's why I say it's slice of life, because there is no like huge like plot arc of like they have to save the world from the evil coders or the virus or whatever. That doesn't exist. This just like 2 dudes. In book 1, they were transported to this other world where they have these game powers and they can increase their stats and do cultivation and enhance their bodies and a bunch of other stuff. And in book 2, that continues. It's just still 2 dudes who are former military, and they're going on adventures and they're having action. And in this case, they're also doing a good amount of crafting. But again, it's very slice of life in that there are little short adventure pockets, stories that are connected together by collected in the story. And it's entertaining, but it's also very easy to pick up and put down. It is like it's almost 700 pages, and that's a big novel. So don't feel like you have to like read it all in one go. It's very easy to read a few chapters. I'm like, oh, that adventure ended. I can put it down. I can go wash the dishes, go watch a TV show, pick it back up, and you still have a really good time. This is actually probably the perfect book for like a long flight or like a long travel trip, because it's really easy to like to just go on and off. For me, the early parts of book 2 focus on crafting, and I personally really enjoyed the realistic crafting that's combined here with fantasy magical theory. That's one of the things this is a thing for me. I like crafting. I do. I love the concept of not just being a destructor or being a destroyer, but being a maker. I find the balance to be very appealing to me, because they could be conflicting concepts, but if done well, they merge really well. And I love a good crafting story when there's a modicum of research that goes into it, and the details show. And in this case, that is definitely the case. Crafting aspects that are talked about here in the story are alchemy and blacksmithing. And I don't know much about I don't know about alchemy, I should say, but the blacksmithing stuff definitely had like actual scientific research about like metallurgy and about what it takes to forge and what it takes, the descriptions about like making things from metal. And you could tell just like by the subtle details that the author did some research and incorporated that into the story, which are always notes that ring true and reach and are interesting to me at least. But again, there's also the magical aspects that are incorporated into it, and they're planned out well, I think. So good stuff there. But again, I also recognize not everybody's a crafting nerd like I am, and a good portion of the beginning section of this novel is crafting. And for some people that might be a drawback, but I just want to mention it because it's just the beginning of the novel. The rest of it is very much not as crafting focused, and there's good action, there's good adventure, there's good community building, development, trading in the story. So don't let the beginning, if you're not into crafting, I should say, don't let the beginning turn you off. The rest, the majority of the story is still good action adventure stuff. As far as the story goes, narratively, it's a multi-perspective narrative story, which means that there's not just one character's point of view storyline in the story. It mostly focuses on the two main characters, but there's also another story thread that goes to the novel from the community that was established in book one, and it's actually done really well in that if the author had just followed the main characters, it might have gotten tedious, especially in some of the crafting things, because it is such a big section and it's developed so well. But for some people, it would have felt tedious after a while. But instead of letting the author letting that happen, he actually inserts another storyline from that community, from the Alva Dungeon. And it helps to actually break up those scenes and keep the reader interested. At least it was for me. So and each storyline is actually very interesting all on its own until they, of course, connect together later. So good stuff, fun stuff. The main characters go on fun adventures, kill lots of stuff, but they also do the cultivation thing and the crafting thing. So all kinds of great things. Overall, good novel. Had a good time with it. It does feel, again, like a collective serial story. So that may be appealing for you. It may not. It kind of depends on what kind of reader you are. And it has a great page count for the price, and it's slice of life format, so it's really easy to pick up and put down and enjoy the small adventures in the novel as well. For me, had a good time with it. 7.5 out of 10. That's the second realm in the 10 Realms book series. Again, it will be out by the time most people read this, which will be August the 30th. The author is actually trying to have it come out in DragonCon and do like this big DragonCon thing. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Hit the music thing again, so sorry. But the author is again trying to coordinate this thing with the DragonCon release. So again, by the time you watch this, it'll be out. So go enjoy it. And that's it for the show, ladies and gentlemen. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, on YouTube, on Patreon, and of course on our website at LitRPGPodcast.com. So again, we'll also have links to show us for other Facebook LitRPG groups where LitRPG authors and fans come together. But thank you for hanging out with me today, ladies and gentlemen. Until we can hang out again, or you see me at DragonCon, I do some videos. Feel free to go read some LitRPG. But again, if you're at DragonCon, come by the booth, come say hello. I'm happy to meet you, and I'm sure all the other authors will. But until we can hang out again, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.